Valli Moosa is a veteran of South African freedom struggle. He worked closely with Nelson Mandela during the settlement talks and served as a negotiator for the ANC. He participated in the drafting of the South African Constitution. He served in President Mandela's cabinet as Minister of Constitutional Development and in President Mbeki's government as Environment Minister. Valli joined the corporate sector in 2004 and currently serves on the board of SAPE Limited. He has served on the boards of Anglo Platinum, Eskom, and Sanlam. Valli served as a facilitator in the global climate change negotiations for several years. He previously served as president of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and the chairman of the UN Commission on Sustainable Development and is the chairman of WWF South Africa. He is the deputy chairperson of the Presidential Climate Commission. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to this rich person that we have with us in on our station this morning. I'm sure you would want to hear what he has to share with us. I think I'm so curious about him enlightening us on his legacy journey. Assalamu alaikum and welcome, Mohammed Valli Moosa.
Assalamu alaikum, Sis Najma, and assalamu alaikum to your listeners.
Wa alaikum salam. So tell us about the early life of Valli Moosa. I was reading through your biography. I'm sure it's a very brief version of it, but I think that the veteran part, the legacy, the political legacy is what sticks with everyone. That's how everyone identifies what people identify you with, especially South Africans. Where did it all start? Please give us a background of your life.
Well, Najma, I grew up in the 50s and the 60s. I finished school, I completed my matric in 1974. And that period was the real dark days of apartheid. It was the period during which my parents were living in Johannesburg in the inner city. They were forcibly moved out. I did most of my schooling in Lens after that. So we were living in group areas. And it was really the most horrible, darkest time of apartheid as such. When I matriculated in 1974, I applied to study at Wits University, but I was denied permission because Wits University at that time was reserved for white people only, and I was told that I have to attend a university for my designated group. And of course, my first year at university, as a result of which was 1976 at the University of Durban, Westville, and that was the year of the great 1976 student uprisings, which I had participated in. And it was a time when I think it would have been very difficult not to take a stand against one of the most oppressive and horrible regimes that humanity has ever seen. And so I don't think there was anything special that made one do it. If you were a person who had any self-dignity, then you would have abided by that famous revolutionary saying that it's better to die on your feet than to live your whole life on your knees. And I think that's what I was part of, a generation of people who have said enough is enough. We're going to bring down the system of apartheid and create a democracy. And that's really what you saw it every day. Nobody had to politicize you or conscientize you. You saw in your face the horror and the evil of apartheid as such. And then, of course, from 1976 up to 1990, when the ANC was unbanned, I was a full-time revolutionary activist participating in the mass movement in this country, in the mass democratic movement in the UDF. I spent four periods in detention without trial in prison, and that's as you say, that's history.
You've cut it short in such a concise way that it tempts me to break it down a little bit, just to go a little deeper into it. I think the activism and the political, becoming a freedom fighter, as it were, does sound very cliched, if you like. because I think a lot of us have forgotten the history and the struggles at the time. So, and then, like you said, you just had to be um, conscious of what was happening around you, and in some way or another, we were all activists in some way. But people like yourself really held that flag, freedom flag, up very high and very tightly, and with much struggle. So your political activism, as it were, what inspired you? What is it that gave you that strength, that courage to say, well, come what may, even if I have to die for the cause? And that's not an exaggeration, because we know many of the freedom fighters did lose their lives. What was that like? What is it that drove you at that point?
Well, it's I think probably a sense of right from wrong. And if you have been brought up in a way to understand what's right and what's wrong, and if in your heart you find it, you look around you, and you see not only your own, at a personal level you're being robbed of your own dignity, but if you look at
Hmm.
what apartheid was doing to South Africans at large, particularly to African people. African people, adults, had to walk around, had to carry a pass, and there were the pass laws at the time. This was one of the most horrible things imaginable.
Hmm.
And you had people living without water, without electricity, without homes, and the suffering that just went on. There were jobs that were just reserved for white people only. And so when you look at all of those sorts of things, I think that you've got to ask yourself, will you be able to live with yourself for the rest of your
Hmm.
life if you just turned a blind eye to that? If you said to yourself, it doesn't matter. And not only that, it doesn't matter that other people are being subjected to this kind of tyranny, but it doesn't matter that somebody has got their boot on my head, that it doesn't
Hmm.
matter. I'll live my life with such indignity as such. And I think that's what actually propelled us and drove us. And there was a period in this country of, in a sense, silence from the oppressed people. After Nelson Mandela and others were imprisoned in the early 60s, you had a period, about a 10-year period, where not much was happening. But then you had the rise of what was referred to as the Black consciousness movement, in mainly in the 70s as such. And the Black consciousness movement inspired many, many young people to in fact take a stand and do something about it. And so, Najma, it's actually very difficult to explain why
Hmm.
one would have taken a stand against apartheid, because for me it's something that came naturally. It's a natural
Correct.
thing to do. It's you know
Right.
it's like, I'm sure, if you see your neighbor in need, even today, you're going to feel you're going to do something about it. And if you can't do something about it, you'll feel something about it. And
Right.
it's really that sense of human solidarity, I think, that
Right.
in and propelled not just me, but thousands and thousands of
Mm.
people at that time to say,
Mhm.
okay, we're now going to go for the final push. And many of us, in fact, then became professional revolutionaries, because it's not like
Right.
I held a full-time job and did it in my part-time. We did it
Mhm.
on a full-time professional basis, because we actually began after the 1976 uprisings and after the formation of the United Democratic Front in 1983. We
Mhm.
began to get that feeling in our bones that we
Uh-huh.
could bring down the system, as powerful that it is, that we could bring it down. And I think it was the time when people stopped going into exile, leaving the country, and those sorts of things. We were just going into prison, coming out, and we continued the next day. And
Mhm.
that's in a sense what's propelled us. I must tell you, Najma, that was the period from 1976 to 1990 was a period of heightened mass action in South Africa. In fact, it's
Mhm.
one of the great mass movements of humankind of all time. I can't think. I've been trying to think, in recent years, I've been trying to think of whether anywhere else there has been a mass uprising of the intensity that we had, with the momentum that we had, and in the unstoppable manner that we had. It wasn't a mass uprising that took place over one long weekend, over a few weeks. It just went on and on and on for years, in a manner which truly involved large numbers of people in South Africa on a non-racial basis.
Mhm.
And there was just no way in the end that the apartheid regime was going to be able to withstand that.
Mhm. With support, of course, from the some international pressure. That how did that happen? Because even today we find that that becomes so politicized. Of course, it was political, but how did you gain momentum there?
Well, the international community, you have freedom-loving people all over the world, uh, who take the view that they should be taking a stand against oppression wherever in the world it is happening. And so you
Hmm.
had what was called the global solidarity movement. People set up anti-apartheid organizations in various countries around the world. They tried to campaign to stop their own governments from collaborating with the apartheid regime. Of course, most of the Western governments collaborated with the apartheid regime almost right until the end as such. But you had people that were campaigning, and this played a very, very important role. But I must say that at the end of the day, the principal actors were the people of South Africa. You can have whatever kind of international pressure and international solidarity, but if the people of South Africa didn't stand up, ordinary people, and take their future into their own hands, that wouldn't have taken us very far as such.
Hmm. I'm thinking about the sacrifices people like yourself made. I mean, your wife had to live a life with a political activist, and your days were very unpredictable in terms of where you would be next. Um, what was that like in terms of your personal sacrifices?
Well, if you want to bring down a brutal apartheid regime, you had to accept that it was not going to be a walk in the park.
Hmm.
That you had to display a degree of bravery and courage, which I think lots of people, I'm not the only one, lots of people had displayed that as such. But of course, it meant that you were not going to, for the period of the struggle, you were not going to live a normal life. It's not
Hmm.
normal to be arrested at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning by the security branch, and to spend time in solitary confinement, and to have family life disrupted as such, not to be able to keep a home, or a fixed place to stay in for years and years and years. Actually, I didn't have a home because you
Right.
you you, you couldn't. You were constantly trying to evade arrest and continue like that. And of course, you didn't have a stable job, so you were not earning. You didn't have a medical aid or pension or earning a fixed salary as such, and you had to find ways of surviving. But that's the kind of commitment that lots of people did. I mean, people like us said, "What is that?" It's not much that's being asked of us. If you take the people who were in prison, Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Kathrada, all of those people, they'd been in prison for decades, and not once did they weaken their stand against apartheid. That the
Hmm.
regime had offered them their freedom on many occasions, provided they renounced the freedom struggle, but they refused to do so. Remember, they were sentenced to life. It meant
Hmm.
they were nobody knew that they would be released after about 27 years, because we hadn't won the struggle. At that time, they were going to spend
Right.
the rest of their lives in prison, and they said the struggle continues. So
Mm.
when you look at those sorts of examples, the sacrifices that all of us were making was not as great as the sacrifice that other people were making. Then there were those who were killed in detention, those who were
Correct.
shot in their homes, people who lost their lives. So we didn't think that we were the ones making the greatest sacrifice, because there were so many people who had much greater sacrifices than we were making at the time.
Hmm. Well, I admire your humility here because for me, I have the utmost respect for even the smallest sacrifice that people like yourself made. And I think that's the reason for this interview today. We need to bring this out a bit more often because I think South Africans at this point are disappointed, despondent, and depressed at some level with the current, people in power. So, and I don't want to get into too much of that angle in this discussion now, but just because it popped up in my head, I'm wondering what is our audience thinking when you're talking about the apartheid regime and how brutal it was and how we changed this country, right, through the struggle and sacrifices that people had made. Was it really worth it? I can hear those voices. I'm speaking now on behalf of my audience.
Yeah, Najma, during the days of the struggle, like let's take for example, in the early 1960s, you had the Sharpeville massacre,
Hmm.
and the Sharpeville massacre was one of the most horrible things that had happened, and many people thought that this was the end, that this country is going to the dogs, everything's going to collapse, there's going to be an orgy of racial violence, etc. And then those with means, many white people said they're going to leave the country. And so in the
Hmm.
60s, you had people leaving the country. They said, we're going to go away. We're not going to be part of this country, etc., etc. And and uh, uh, and then you had many other people, even people, black people, who felt, I'm just the situation is hopeless
Mm.
because the apartheid regime is prepared to use guns to kill people. Who are we unarmed people thinking that we will win? It's just a hopeless situation. I'm disillusioned. I'm not going to do anything. So the idea of disillusionment with the system is not a completely new idea as such. Uh,
Okay.
in 1976, when we had the 1976 uprisings, you had a wave of South Africans, mainly white South Africans, who said, we are leaving the country. And lots of people left the country. In the 80s, when we had the United Democratic Front, the period of what we refer to as ungovernability and people's power,
Hmm.
many people also left the country as such. The economy was going down, the country is going down the dogs. So, you can take the attitude today to say, oh, well, I'm not happy with the way things are going, so I'm going to leave the country. And it's not a crime to leave the country, frankly, by the way. I'm not saying that at all. It's
Hmm.
just not, we fought for freedom of movement, and people shouldn't be made to feel guilty if they want to leave the country. And then others say, oh, well, I'm not going to participate in politics. I'm not going to do anything because I'm disillusioned. I've lost confidence, and so I'm not going to do anything. Now, as soon as we turn ourselves into becoming inactive and apathetic human beings, in other words, we're
Correct.
turning a blind eye to the wrong that is happening, what we are doing is that we're playing into the hands of the wrongdoers. We're playing into the
Hmm.
hands of the thieves and the crooks because they want good people to say that, oh, well, I'm disillusioned, I'm not going to do anything. In other words, when you say you're not going to do anything, you're disillusioned, means I'm going to leave the crooks free to do whatever they want to do,
Right.
to steal as much
Right.
as they want to. And that is unacceptable. It's morally unacceptable for good people simply to turn a blind eye. And we must not expect, Sis Najma, we must not expect that the day will come where all human beings will turn into angels, when we will not have
Sure.
wrongdoers, etc. etc. That day is not going to come in our lifetimes, and depends on what you believe in. It may come one day at some point in time, but this is not the time where human beings are all going to turn into angels. Because if human beings were going to turn into angels after the struggle were over, actually we wouldn't have needed religion as such. What
Hmm.
there would be, because everybody would be angels. We will have
Hmm.
wrongdoers amongst us, and it's a constant battle for us. The struggle of good over evil is a constant battle. We need to
Right.
continue. We need to tell the wrongdoers, we're not going to give you an open field. We are there. We will challenge you. And there are
Mhm.
wrongdoers. And certainly in our government, and even in my own party, in the ANC, it's full of them. But let's look at the achievements since Nelson Mandela came out of prison. If you look at that, you will know that the world today in South Africa is a completely different world that we were living in under apartheid. This is not, it's not even comparable. The achievements have been tremendous. But we still have the wrongdoers amongst us, and we've got to continue fighting them. And we will. We will be able to overcome.
Hmm. I like that optimism, especially given the time that South Africans are in, feel they are in at this point in time. Do you feel that South Africans at this point are apathetic? They just, we are complaining, but it's not enough.
No, no. Look, it's not a crime to complain. Frankly, I mean, there would be something wrong if people don't go around complaining. That would be inhuman, especially when
Yeah,
you see stuff happening. But South Africans are not complacent. I must tell you, we can be
yeah.
so proud of our country and the people of our country. Take, for example, an organization like Gift of the Givers. They're just
Correct.
going on with their work. They're not asking for anybody's permission. When they see that there's a problem, when they see that there's human suffering, they move in and they act and they do something of that sort. Take the time when we had the big problem of the Guptas
Hmm.
controlling government through Jacob Zuma and others. The people of this country stood up. There were protest actions everywhere. The media were writing stories exposing the thing all over the show. And today, those crooks are all on the run. The Guptas are on the run. They may not be in jail, but they certainly are on the run. And so you're able to achieve this because people are standing up. South Africans are not people who are going to accept wrongdoing as such. I certainly don't think that the people of this country are apathetic in any way. I see people being active all the time. Of course, what doesn't help if you say you're not going to be active? You must complain, but then you must say, this is what
Do
I'm going to do
something about
about
it.
it.
Yes.
We all have something to do, and not everybody can make the same contribution. Some people can only make a small contribution, perhaps, help people in their own communities through charitable organizations or whatever else it is. But we have a role to play, and I don't think anybody is going to be able to silence South Africans. Not
Mhm.
this.
And do you feel that, excuse me, do you feel that the youth, you spoke about when you were at university and that was the driving force at the time. Um, what about the youth of today and the born frees, so to speak? Do you think that obviously it's a different generation and the mindsets are different and how they deal and view things completely differently? But how do we, what do you think? Do they relate to what you just spoke about in terms of your history and the struggles in the 70s and 80s?
Well, in every generation, people like to say the youth of today know nothing. They are apathetic and they are not serious about life, etc., etc. I think
Mm,
it's wrong to say that. I'm often when I really want to discuss something serious, and I
mm-hmm,
really want to get some good ideas, I sit with young people. And I find the young people of our country really very, very inspirational. I must tell you, in general, they are much smarter than all of us are. And
mm-hmm,
many young people have taken the opportunities that freedom and democracy has offered them really to advance themselves. There was a time
true.
that if you went into the offices of any of the big law firms in Sandton or any of the big chartered accountancy firms like PricewaterhouseCoopers or Deloitte or any of them, that all the accountants there were white, and you had a few Indians there, and
Mm,
almost all of them were male. If you go to any
right.
of these firms now, you will find that there's a large number of women, a large number.
Mm-hmm.
In some of them, the majority of the accountants are women. In the law firms, you'll find large numbers of women, and you'll find large numbers of black people that are chartered accountants today and running these firms. So young people have taken a huge advantage of the opportunities that have presented to them. And I think that their inventiveness, their cleverness is helping to change this economy. It's one of the reasons why the South African economy may not be growing as fast as we all would want it to grow, but it has been on a continuous growth path since 1994. And I think a lot of
Mhm.
that can be attributed to the creativity of young people who are constantly finding different things to do. And when I first went into government in 1994 compared to now, I think the size of the economy is not double or triple. It's probably in the region of 6 times the size of the economy at the time. And one of the reasons is because we have young people. Our biggest, I think, investment and asset that we have in this country are young people. And they're doing different things. If you take the fees must fall movement,
Mhm.
there were things about the fees must fall movement which probably were not all that good when people became violent unnecessarily and those sorts of things. But the call for decolonizing society,
Mm.
decolonizing intellectual life, it didn't immediately strike me. And I didn't immediately understand that. But even now, I'm beginning to see the tremendous wisdom of the movement calling for a decolonization of things. That there's too,
Mhm.
they made us realize that too much of what we think and what we do is done through the eyes of the big media centers of the world, London and New York. And so I think young people are taking things into their own hands. And of course, I just wish that the next parliament that we elect in 2024 will be predominantly young people, because frankly, they're
Mhm.
cleverer than us, and they're going to take this
Correct.
country to the place it needs to go to.
Yep. So, after the break, we find out from our very special guest, Mohammed Valli Moosa, on his time representing the ANC as a negotiator with Nelson Mandela.
400 or visit quantu.co.za. The Quantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Did you know a sponsored water well and borehole allows children to go back to school, empowers communities, and is a means of sadaqah jariyah? There are many villages in Africa and Afghanistan that are in need of water wells and boreholes. Sponsor a water well in Africa at 14,500 rands, or a borehole in Africa and Afghanistan at 49,500 rands. Call Africa Muslims Agency on 011 834 8685 or donate at Africa Muslims Agency. .co.za. Africa Muslims Agency, inspiring the spirit of giving.
You know, it's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
Devastating floods in Pakistan have washed away villages, claimed the lives of more than 1,000 people, damaged nearly 1 million homes, and left over 33 million people in desperate need of help. As the catastrophe unfolds, Islamic Relief is on the ground, reaching people with life-saving aid. Our team are working tirelessly to deliver food and shelter. Your support is urgently needed now to help save more lives. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
And my very special guest in our first hour today is Mohammed Valli Moosa. He is enlightening us on his legacy journey. Before the break, we asked the question on his representation as a negotiator with Nelson Mandela. Can you take us through that, Valli?
Yeah. So, you know, by the late 80s, the struggle had been won. The apartheid regime was collapsing everywhere. And they had decided in 1990 to come to the table. The liberation movement had for many, many decades called on the apartheid regime to negotiate an end to apartheid. But because they wouldn't do that, the struggle was conducted. In 1990, they finally decided that they are prepared to talk. And so, but to be prepared to talk, it shouldn't just be words. So the first thing we said, you can't expect us to talk to you about a settlement if our people are still in prison. Because you can't talk to prisoners as such. So the first thing you've got to do is to release all the political prisoners, including those that you have sentenced to life in prison. And this was a very difficult thing for the apartheid regime because they said some of those people were members of Umkhonto we Sizwe, they were carrying arms, they planted bombs, they killed people, etc., etc. But that was a non-negotiable precondition for us that there is no way that negotiations will start while freedom fighters are in prison. So hence the process started. In the late 80s, the release of some of the high-profile political prisoners. Eventually, and Nelson Mandela was an interesting man because he says, "Don't just release me, because if you release me, I'm not going to talk to you as long as my comrades are still in prison. And frankly, you should release my comrades before you release me." So they started releasing, Ahmed Kathrada, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, various other sorts of people. And then in the end, they released almost everybody. The last few people they struggled to release, one of whom was McBride. But even that, there was an insistence on the part of the ANC that all political prisoners should be released. The second thing is that we cannot be talking to you while political activity in South Africa is banned and political parties are banned. So a precondition for negotiations was that the ANC must be unbanned, but not just the ANC, all the other organizations, including the PAC, the South African Communist Party, and every other political party should be banned. And then we cannot have negotiations if individuals are banned. Large numbers of individuals were still living under banning order. I was a banned person at the time, and so the demand was there should be a lifting of the banning orders on everybody. So there should be freedom of movement, there should be a freedom of media, etc. So there was a whole set of what we refer to as preconditions in order to create the climate for negotiations. And that that was referred to, some people referred to this as talks about talks. Of course, you had to communicate with the enemy if you wanted to communicate your preconditions for negotiations.
Right.
And when the negotiations started, this was an extremely complex matter, because here you're talking about the culmination of 300 years of struggle. You're talking about negotiating on behalf not only of the present generation of South Africans, but the large numbers of people who sacrificed their lives and who were killed in the struggle for freedom. How do you actually do this? The burden on those of us who became negotiators were immense at that point in time. So we decided that the best thing to do would be to first define what is it that we are negotiating. And so we had a simple declaration, which we wanted the enemy to accept, that the negotiations is about negotiating an end to apartheid in all its forms and its replacement with a non-racial democratic South Africa in a united country. So that was more or less the basis that was laid, and we entered into then years and years of negotiations, as you know, which finally culminated in the first democratic elections to be held on the 27th of April 1994. We are very fortunate, I must just say, that we had Nelson Mandela leading the negotiations on behalf of the people of South Africa, because he was not only a person of immense moral stature and intellectual rigor, but he provided the courageous leadership that was needed. The enemy found him to be a person that was not easy to deal with. He was as hard as nails. Everybody knows him as a wonderful old man,
soft-natured,
nice to
forgiving,
everybody, those sorts of things. But I can tell you, in the negotiations with the apartheid regime, he was as tough as nails.
stoic.
When they sat across the table from him, you could see the trepidation in their eyes, because he put the fear of hell into them. He didn't give an inch on anything, frankly. Some people think that negotiations was about compromises. Actually, he didn't give an inch on anything. He wasn't prepared to do that.
That's very interesting. It's the first time I'm actually hearing that. Having served on various boards like the likes of Sanlam, Anglo Platinum, and Eskom, this constant and consistent crisis of electricity we find ourselves in with Eskom, what are your thoughts on the current state of the electricity provider?
I think that it's the electricity provider, Eskom probably would themselves agree, and I think most people in government would agree, that the current model which we have is not working. There's no point trying to continue to make something. It's proven that it's not working. And therefore, we need to replace the model that we have completely. And there's a number of things that needs to be done. Firstly, that the government should not be the sole provider of electricity. It should be a provider of electricity, because you can't just have the private sector selling electricity, because in that case you could have electricity would be going to the highest bidder. But we need large-scale private ownership of electricity generation. The second thing that needs to happen is that the transmission of electricity, in other words, the huge network of power lines that we have in this country, should also not be part of the same entity that owns the generators. Because then you have, in a sense, you have a conflict of interest that is coming in also. The third thing that needs to happen is that we need to more rapidly modernize our electricity generation. Generating electricity from coal for South Africa is going to be with us for a very long time to come. It will be with us for another generation. And there's nothing anybody will be able to do about that, because that's just the reality. We're sitting on piles of coal, cheap coal in South Africa, and we have power stations that still have a long life. But that's not the future. And the future needs to start now with renewable energy. We need to modernize, replace all new electricity that's generated must be renewable and electricity, and that should be done on a more rapid basis. The next thing that needs to be, you want to come in?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and then of course there needs to be the question of energy efficiency. During the time when we were a small economy and we had a lot of coal-fired power generation, the entire economy became inefficient from an energy point of view. So you need to introduce greater energy efficiency so that in fact we can do more with less electricity as such. So those are some of the things that I think that we need to do. I don't think, Najma, that the electricity crisis is about to be over. I think it's going to be with us for quite some time. Quite clearly, that's what Eskom says. That's what the Minister for Energy says, and it probably is the case. It's an unfortunate situation that we are in. Having said that, there's a global crisis in energy and in electricity. In Europe, there's a huge crisis that the Europeans are facing, and there's a challenge that they're facing as they go into the European winter. And we're finding for the first time something that nobody would have expected, that Europe is bringing online coal-fired power stations again. It's just unbelievable that they are doing that, because all of us thought that Europe will move away from fossil fuels and from highly polluting power stations, and they're moving back into that. But it's a sign of the global crisis that is faced. But there are solutions, and I think that we need to move faster on those solutions.
I was about to say that South Africans are becoming impatient. What you've described, what needs to be done. First of all, we could spend another hour talking about what went wrong, and everyone's hearing about what went wrong. And I think users are frustrated, angry. So I know you don't have the answers, but what can we say about us feeling impatient now?
I think there would be something very odd if all of us didn't feel impatient with all the load shedding going on. I mean, it would be. I think we must be impatient. I think we must be impatient with it, and because if we don't show our impatience, there won't be the urgency that we have over there. And but the important thing is to look forward and to say that frankly, how difficult can it be to solve this problem? I do think that sometimes I feel that there isn't the necessary sense of urgency that there should be there, and the answer lies not in chasing the past. Because you would hear that a power station has been overworked, it's an old power station, it has now gone offline, out of service, it's faulty, and therefore there has to be load shedding. But that's chasing the past. We've got to do that. The solution lies in building a new future. And the new future is modern, renewable energy. That's what I think. And of course, I would think that because of my climate change background, and because I do think that one of the greatest challenges that humanity faces today is to move towards a low emissions economy and to do something about slowing down the terrible global warming that is happening, that's causing immense suffering for people in so many parts of the world. Look at Pakistan now. Look at that unimaginable
devastation,
unimaginable floods that you've got in Pakistan. Nobody could have imagined something. Look at the fires in California. The United States of America is the most powerful country in the world, does not have a way of stopping the fires that are burning in California. Do you know that those fires have been burning for months and months and months? They are unable to put a stop in that. And so not all of it, but a lot of this is caused by global warming, the burning of fossil fuels, and the pollution that we have. And we have a responsibility to start changing the way in which economies are run.
Valli Moosa is the Deputy Director of the Presidential Climate Commission. We find out after this video clip on what his role is.
Our atmosphere has been ravished in the name of money. The rich and powerful have consumed our common atmosphere without paying for it. Taking what does not belong to you, in plain language, is called theft. The burning of oil and coal without paying for the resulting emissions has been one of the biggest drivers of economies in modern times. Therefore, much of the wealth of rich countries has been the result of the proceeds of crime. The crime of expropriating common property for private gain. The crime of destroying nature. We expect the climate culprits to stand up and be counted at COP26. We expect them to show remorse. We expect them to tell the world exactly what they intend to do to right the wrongs which they have committed.
What does your role entail, Valli?
Najma, I just missed what you said there.
Just before we showed the video clip, I asked what your role entails in this position that you're in as the Deputy Director of Presidential Climate Commission. Did you, was that clearer?
Yeah.
There seems to be a disturbing sound.
There's a bit of a noise. There
Yeah.
is a noise. Let me just tell them to stop the noise, because my neighbors are building, you won't believe it, and they're causing such chaos here. I did say to them, Najma will be very cross, but
I will learn from your forbearance. What you've done over the years.
I just want to call them. You're gonna have to hear my conversation with my neighbor very quickly.
Well, this is South Africa then, eh? Friendly and sociable. Right. So let me, while we're waiting for Valli Moosa to speak to his neighbors, let me tell you a little bit about what to expect later on in the program. At 12:35 or so, we'd be crossing over to Cape Town on a majestic journey of the
Okay,
gem.
I'm back.
Great.
Okay.
So
All right.
thank you.
Let's hope. So what I was going to say is that the Presidential Climate Commission, the President Ramaphosa is the chairperson of the commission. I am the deputy chair. I do it purely on a voluntary basis. It's not a job. And this is an independent commission that is made up of business, the private sector, the trade unions, and all the environmental NGOs, and of course, government. So the four big social partners make up this commission. And the job of this commission is to develop national consensus on how we move from a high emissions, very polluting economy, which is what we are now, to a renewable and low emissions economy. This is a very complicated thing, because if you talk about closing a coal mine, there are workers who are working there. They will lose their jobs. Right. They're supporting families. So you can't just easily do that kind of thing without consulting communities and workers. So that's what this commission does, is that it's trying to find an agreed pathway to move towards a renewable and low emissions future. That's what we're doing. And of course, they've called on me to chair this thing. It's a complicated negotiations that I conduct between the various social partners, but I think it's important, and I'm happy that so far it's working reasonably well.
Okay. And what are the challenges you're facing in terms of this transition, if you like?
The big challenges that we have currently is, what do you do about the fact that if you take many of the small towns in Mpumalanga, those small towns exist because there's a power station and there are coal mines. And of course, we can't be burning coal forever because it's polluting the atmosphere and it's causing global warming. But if we close down those coal mines, what happens to those towns? There's no economy there. That's where the people are working. And the workers there are supporting their families, sending their children to school, etc., etc. So it creates an enormous amount of complications. So the first thing the Commission is saying is that you can't do these things without consulting with those workers and those communities. But the second thing we're saying is that nonetheless, we will have to do it. We can't continue burning coal forever because that's also not acceptable. So that is the big challenge. That it's not a unique South African challenge. It's a challenge about how do you to change our economy in a manner which, rather than destroying jobs, creates jobs. Instead of
Got it.
destroying livelihoods, creates prosperity. Because we do believe that a low emissions economy should be advantageous from every point of view. And you can't have a situation where the poor people who work in the coal mines are going to pay the price of unemployment because the rest of us middle class people are using electricity and all of those sorts of things. And that was really my message to the rich countries, because global warming hasn't been caused by South Africa. In fact, it hasn't been caused by Africa. It hasn't been caused by Pakistan or India or China either. The global warming which we have today is largely caused by the United States of America and Europe, who since the Industrial Revolution have been putting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere to such an extent that it has changed the composition of the atmosphere. And today we are having global warming, and the people in poor countries are suffering. You are having droughts in poor countries, floods in poor countries, and the rich countries are the ones that are responsible for this. So at a global level, we are saying to those rich countries that you are the culprits and you have a responsibility to do something about this. So that's the complexity really that we're dealing with. It's not an easy thing. Take, for example, electric vehicles. The future
Right.
is electric vehicles. We've got to have electric vehicles. That's the future. But what do you do about the huge motor vehicle industry that we have in South Africa? We're a big manufacturer of motor vehicles that burn oil and diesel and petrol and such things. You can't just shut that down. You have petrol stations all around the country which employ large numbers of people, owned by small businesses. You can't just shut that down. So it's how do you make that turnaround, which is what we are negotiating in the Climate Commission, and finding out what's the art of the possible, pushing the envelope a little bit, quite a lot actually, but at the same time ensuring that we don't leave behind the workers and the communities. That's a challenge. It sounds like an impossible task. It's a very difficult task, but I think we're up to the challenge.
So are we on par with the UN Commission on the SDG goals? Or,
As far as,
yeah.
yeah, look, as far as South Africa is concerned, it depends who you ask. In any country, it depends who you ask. My own view is that I'm satisfied that as a country, we have set emission reduction targets which are in keeping with the global requirements. Our big target now as a country, which has been accepted, is that by the year 2050, we should be what's called a net zero emissions economy. In other words, we should not be putting any more carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere. We should become a neutral country from that point of view. So the challenge we have is now in 2022, and 2050 is not a long way. In the next 28 years, how do we do that? We've also set targets for staging posts in between as such. So I'm reasonably clear that that has happened. There are many other United Nations Sustainable Development Goals about access to water, access to healthcare, and those sorts of things.
Education, healthcare, yes.
Education, etc. I'm not
Mm.
satisfied with where we are as South Africa, and I don't think the UN development goals are sufficient of a measure, because with some of the things we easily meet the requirements of the UN goals. But remember, the UN goals are set for everybody. The rest of Africa is much poorer than we are. So if we
Right.
compare ourselves to the rest of Africa, then we would say we're doing very well. But I think
Right.
that's not the measure we want to. We know that we've got huge challenges, especially when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare. So
True.
those global measures are okay, but we must measure ourselves in terms of our own standards and our own beliefs about how we want fellow South Africans to live. And we know that the challenges are really very, very big, and we must keep our shoulders to the wheel.
Hmm. I like that you said that right almost at the end of our interview this morning. And would you please leave a message for our fellow South Africans and viewers around the world on what this was about today?
Well, I think that there are many things that we should be unhappy about in today's world, and there are many things that we should be unhappy about in today's South Africa. It is human and it's the right thing to complain and to be unhappy about what's happening. But the responsibility which we have as human beings is to display human solidarity with those who are less fortunate than us. And it starts right here with us. Each one of us must ask ourselves, have I stopped the wrongdoing myself? Am I a law-abiding citizen? And the second thing, what am I doing to help fellow human beings or to assist them? What am I doing to stand up for those who are too weak to stand up to wrongdoing for themselves? And I think once we all ask those questions, we will continue on the path to creating a better South Africa and a better world.
Thank you very much. And we thank you once again for your time this morning. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor. I hope to meet with you soon or speak to you again. And on behalf of Salam Media, thank you and have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you, Sis Najma. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. All right, after this break, we speak to SANMWF spokesperson Shamshad Sayed and her panelist Sadia Rancelli, who highlights the success of their conference. It was the 8th Sisters and Youth Empowerment Conference. I'll be right back.